Question: what League's relic was the best? Anyone with a slightly underdeveloped frontal lobe will probably say something like Fire Sail,
And a person of culture would probably say Trickster.
but these are all just opinions. And today I'm going to give my objective opinion about every single relic that we have had through Leagues 1 to 4. We know that some relics will be making a return in some form in Leagues 5, and I think this will give us a bit of an idea of how relics have kind of evolved over time. We could take a good guess at some of the relics that will be returning. I've put all of the relics in order of the league they came from, and let's just start with Leagues 1. This was Twisted League, and you unlocked to Korend or Zaya. And the first relic of tier 1 is Abyssal Accumulator. Abyssal Accumulator was a weird one because this is basically just an Ava's Assembler. It literally does nothing except for saving ammo, and we know that in future leagues this was just kind of weaved into the ranged relics, so I think this is an easy one to start and we can just drop this into F tier. Endless Endurance. This relic started a whole meme, okay? This started a cult. People who didn't pick Endless Endurance were known as walkers, because Endless Endurance gave you unlimited run energy, and this was the first kind of temporary game mode to experiment with endless run energy. I just loved the divide between people who picked this and people who didn't, because you would just be running along with Endless Endurance and you'd go past someone who was walking and you'd take time out of your day. You would take time out of your day to go up to them and let them know, you know, maybe run a few laps around them. Endless Endurance also quadrupled your hit point restoration, so this is like a 2-in-1. I mean, honestly, I think this is a solid A tier. It just has to be A tier because it was such a meme. This little one here is called Dark Altar Devotion. I think this was probably the least picked tier 1 relic. It worked like a bone crusher in that it would automatically kind of like bury your bones, but it would quadruple the XP you got from burying bones, and it also gave you double the ensouled heads on an ensouled head drop. Endless Endurance was just way better, and I think if you were going down a ranged route anyway, you would always pick Abyssal Accumulator, so I think we're also going to have to put this in F tier for now. This brings us to the tier 2 relics now. So we have Hardcore Harvester. This was a fantastic relic. This gave you triple the resources when you were, you know, mining, woodcutting, fishing, all of those things for collecting resources. But it also sped up farming ticks, which is something that in the future has gone into a farming specific relic. So I think for this one, it's quite easily, it's an A tier. I think, again, looking at this objectively, at the time of Leagues 1, this was an insane relic. This was pretty much the only multiplicative resource gathering relic there was. In the sense of Leagues 1, it was A tier. We might come back to change that. We have Arcane Courier. This one banked all of your resources whenever you gathered them. It also sent all of the supply crates you got from the Wintertard or resources you got from the Blast Mine straight to the bank as well. So it was, again, Zaya specific, basically just a remote storage relic from like Deadman mode like we've seen in the present. It was good. It was definitely good for AFK, or if you just wanted to hammer the mini games. I think this one is probably C tier, to be honest. We then have Unnatural Selection, which just let you pick your own Slayer task or farming contract. I feel like for the time, given that you were locked to just one region and there was a very limited pool of Slayer creatures, again, I'm putting this in C tier. The next three are all just XP boosting relics for either skilling or combat. It's important to remember with these that back in the Twisted League, I think XP was capped at 5 times. It didn't go up to the ridiculous rates that we've seen in more recent leagues. So these were quite impactful for the time. All of these are just going to go straight into C tier. So now we have the tier 4 relics. The first one is Spirit of Din. This just made Wintertard super chill. You wouldn't take damage from Wintertard's attacks. I think they didn't interrupt your actions, and you also received triple the resources from Wintertard. I don't think it's good, but I'm trying to think of it for Leagues 1 particularly. I think it's maybe a C tier. I definitely already want to move some things around because C tier is getting a little heavy right now, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. Konar's Blessing was actually really good. This gave all players like a 10% damage boost or 30% damage boost if they're on a Slayer task. So I think one of the better tier 4 relics. So I'm going to put this one in B tier, especially if you picked Unnatural Selection. That was great. They went well together. Treasure Seeker definitely revolutionized League leagues going forward, because not only has stacking clue scrolls become just a given at this stage, but back then it was such a novelty that I think most people were picking this because it was just so much fun. And I think for that reason, this is going to be my first S tier pick. That doesn't mean that other Clue Hunter or Clue Scroll relics are going to be S tier, but I think that because this was the first one and it completely changed how players engaged with Clue Scrolls. So this is my first S tier for now. That may change, It may come down to A tier. This first one in the final tier of Leagues 1 sped up all of your attacks, magic, ranged, melee by 1 tick. It was great back then. This was the first real experiment with this. And again, I think it's an A tier. It's definitely an A tier. Unfortunately, the other two were completely underwhelming because of that. Xeric's Resilience restored your prayer slowly over time, but also reduced your damage from monsters by 50%. It's a good relic, don't get me wrong, but compared to reducing your attack speed, it didn't compare, so B tier. And then Xeric's Wisdom just doubled your XP in all skills, combat, skilling, and it's stacked with any other multipliers. I feel like this for a final relic is actually really bad, and I think it's the first relic that I'm going to put in the never again option. And the reason for that isn't because I think the relic design is bad. The relic design is fine. But I think when it's stacked up against the other choices, like increasing your attack speed, and remember that was the only relic back then that did that, or just trivializing PVM opportunities like the Chambers of Xeric for players that hadn't got into that content back then, doubling your XP just really felt like a bad choice at this stage, unless you were totally against combat and you were just one of those people that wanted to skill all the time. I don't think it's a good choice to have in the final tier. I don't think it will ever happen again. Quick review of these, because I'm already thinking that some of these are a bit too generous and some of them maybe aren't generous enough. I think the Dark Devotion is actually going into the never again. Despite me absolutely glazing this Clue Scroll relic, I'm going to move it down into A tier. I'm going to move it down to A tier, and I'm also going to move the Harvest down into B tier. Okay, Leagues 2 time. This is where things start to look a lot more familiar, because I think the format of Leagues 2 was very similar to obviously what was done more recently with Leagues 4. We have Endless Harvest, Production Master, and Skilling Prodigy. Endless Harvest was huge back here because it doubled the resources you got, sent them straight to the bank. You got experience for all the resources you gathered, unlike Leagues 1. Just reminded me, that is the reason I'm moving it down into C tier right now, because this is a definite B tier relic. This is a great relic. However, Production Master was also incredible. It just processed all of your items in 1 tick. It was incredible. It did take a lot of AFKing away from you though. So let's say you just wanted to have a chill time, doing some skilling, getting some XP. This wasn't the relic for you. This was for people who wanted to go fast. I think it was on par with Endless Harvest, so it's going B tier. Skilling Prodigy. Now this was for big brain players because it boosted all non-combat skills by 12. It unlocked a lot of quicker methods of progressing through leagues, quicker than the other two. For any Kandarin enjoyers, if you pick this relic, it allowed you to make Zenite jewelry as early as like 80 crafting. I think if you knew how to use this, you could definitely argue that it was an A tier relic. However, I'm probably going to upset a lot of people here. I'm going to put it in C tier because I just feel like it did fall off. You know, it would get to the point of the league where it had completed its use. And if you didn't pick regions that had really high skill requirements behind some of the items there, then this wasn't all that useful anyway. Okay, tier 2. These were all of like the transport or like mobility utility relics. You had Fairy's Flight, which allowed you to teleport to any spirit tree or fairy ring. This changed a lot in Leagues 4 and allowed you to teleport to tool leprechauns as well, which I think put it on a tier above. But I actually think this is an F tier relic because compared to the other two, it does not come close. Eternal Jeweler was very good, so much so that it's barely changed in the times that it has come back. It gave you a bunch of jewelry and then just gave you unlimited teleports with your jewelry, so this was incredibly useful early on, like insanely useful. I think this one's also C tier though, because again, it falls off late game. And then Last Recall. I don't think I have to explain why, but this is the first S tier relic. For sure, and I'm standing by that, that's not going to change. If you've never played Leagues, Last Recall gave you an item, which essentially allowed you to create like a save point where you last teleported away from, and then you would click on that item and teleport straight back to that place. So this allowed you to do some pretty crazy things. Back then, doing Barrow's chest became trivial. God Wars dungeon became insane because you wouldn't have to get 40 KC every time you went back to the God Wars dungeon. And just for like general Slayer or getting around the game, it was really quite good, had a lot of tactical use. I think Last Recall, it's staying up there. Okay, so we have the combat relics now, and they all roughly did the same thing by halving your attack speed, rounded up, and giving you some extra accuracy, saving ammunition on range, saving runes on magic. The melee one even gave you a little bit of damage reduction. I think for this league, these were all pretty well balanced. I would even go as far to say that magic was probably lower than the other two forms of combat style this league, because we didn't have the shadow at that stage. The best you could get with magic back then was probably a nightmare staff or a sang staff from Theatre of Blood. So I would go as far to say that the magic one goes into C tier and the other two go into B tier. Okay, tier 5. This was a choice between Clue Scrolls or Slayer. The Clue Scroll one I'm not going to explain in too much detail. It did pretty much the same thing as it did in Leagues 1. I've left the other one in A tier because it kind of sets the bar, you know. This one didn't really develop much on it. I'm just going to leave it in C tier because sure, it was good. But Unnatural Selection was a cut above, in my opinion. It allowed you to pick your own Slayer task, which back then, considering that you were selectively choosing your regions, you could have a really good time with Slayer. B tier. B tier for now. Tier 5. Wait, did I already say tier 5? Maybe? I don't know. Tier 5, we have Infernal Gathering, which gave you some infernal tools, and that made it so it would instantly process the resources you gathered. So like logs would just get burned, fish would just get cooked, ores would just get smelted. I think infernal tools I would put in maybe C tier, but I do think that this tier in general was really weak, and I'm gonna upset some people here, and I'm gonna put Equilibrium and the Botanist into F tier, and I will explain. Equilibrium, a little bit complicated, would give you a additional XP bonus whenever you did anything in game that gave you XP. That XP bonus would be based on like 10% of your total level. So if you had a total level of 2000 back then and you, let's say, just hit a monster, you would get your experience plus an additional 200 experience. Don't get me wrong, it was good, but pretty much for the same reasons as I think Xeric's Wisdom in the first league. It gave you additional XP at a point in the game where you were so far developed that it just didn't feel that good. Unless your goal was to max, unless your goal was to get dragon rank and you just wanted to tick off as many 99s as possible, this applied to fewer players in my opinion, and that's what I'm basing it off. The Botanist, I think I'm probably being a bit too harsh on it, probably is a C tier. This one actually did quite a lot. It sped up your farming ticks 5 times. It gave you double the resources from farming. It allowed you to create 4 dose potions instead of 3, and a little extra side effect. Let's say you had a super attack potion and you drank it, it would keep your boosted stats. They would not drain over time. It's a pretty good relic. I'm quite happy keeping it in C tier. Okay, the final tier, we have Draining Strikes, which is like League 4's Soul Stealer. This one restored HP and prayer points on a percentage of your damage dealt. This one was a great relic. This one was genuinely a great relic. I'm putting this in B tier. I think it was fantastic. Exploding Attacks, I'm going to pick up next just because I think this is an F tier relic. I know. It would make single target attacks splash in like a 5x5 area, I think. Oh, I'm wrong. Not a 5x5 area. It would hit up to 5 additional targets. So not even as good as a 5x5 area. Again, by the time you're at your final relic tier, your stats are already pretty developed. And I feel like this one would be great at like Maniacal Monkeys in Kandarin or Dagonauts or any place where you can stack up a load of mobs and shred through them really quick. Sure. It was good for that. But at that point in the game, I just feel like your opportunities to use it were diminishing slightly. And that's just made me think that I'm actually going to move it into the very bottom tier. Sue me. Weapon Specialist, though, is going straight up to A tier. It increased your accuracy and damage by 10%. But the main point of Weapon Specialist was that it regenerated your special attack energy way quicker, and any special attack that costs more than 20% would just cost 20%. So those big special attack weapons that typically take between 50 and 70% special attack energy you could spam those up to 5 times. Let's move on to Shattered Relics League. And you may notice that for Shattered Relics, I have only put the full set effects in because they're the closest thing to actual relics anyway. So let's start with the first one that I've picked, which is Absolute Unit. Absolute Unit was insane. It reduced the damage you would take from any NPC by 50%. And then once that damage reduction had been applied, it would reflect 100% of that back to the thing that attacked you. So it was crazy. I remember as soon as you had this unlocked, you could do anything in the game. And I'm trying to decide right now whether this is an S or A tier relic based on the fact that it trivialized the game too much, or based on the fact that it was so much fun that you didn't have to care. Controversial, I'm putting it in the never again tier. But just to explain, the never again tier isn't below F. It's not like this is so bad that it was just trash. But I'm putting it in never again because I think it will never be in a league again. Saying that though, if they toned it down to like 25% damage reduction, I think it has a place in the game. It would be a nice safe relic to pick. But again, I would put it in A tier if I thought it would actually be in a future league as well. For that reason, I'm also going to move Abyssal Accumulator down to never again because I just don't think that will ever feature in a future league. So we have Knife's Edge next. This gave you more damage based on missing health. So you could deal a lot of damage the lower HP you sat. I can't quite remember if you could pair this with Absolute Unit or whether that was too many fragment slots, but this was just a great relic regardless. And this one obviously went on to become Berserker in Leagues 4. I'll get onto that in a minute. So for that reason, I'm going to put this in C tier. Last Recall again goes into S tier here. This was basically the same thing from Leagues 2. Next up, we have Personal Banker. This was pretty much the same thing as the Storage Relic from Leagues 1. I don't think it really developed on it at all. I'm just going to leave it in F tier. But the difficulty with picking tiers for Shattered Relic set effects was that you could switch them out. You wouldn't be locked into your choice with them. Chain Magic was absolutely sick. It gave you a 60% chance to weave in an extra hit. And the same thing happened with these other 2 relics down here as well. These are all the same thing. A 60% chance to get an extra hit in with magic, melee, ranged. I'm going to put all of these in B tier because I genuinely think they were great. I love that you could just occasionally get so many hits off. And especially with faster attacking weapons, these went absolutely crazy. The Trailblazer Relic I wasn't mad about. It allowed you to teleport to waystones in all the different regions around the game. So yeah, it gave you a teleport to pretty much all the major regions, but we'll leave it in F tier for now. The Alchemist was a weird one as well because it basically did what Production Prodigy did for Leagues 2, processing your full inventory of resources at a time, but it only worked for cooking, making jugs of wine for some reason, and mixing potions. So again, I'm putting this in F tier. The Craftsman did the same thing, but for crafting and smithing. I think that's just a little bit better because they're things that you would do more frequently. But it is still on the face of it a nerf Production Prodigy, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure between F or C here. I think I'll put it in C. Greedy Gatherer, definitely a C tier because it basically did all the things that Endless Harvest did without any sort of caveat. And for that reason, I'm going to move the crafting one down into F actually, because the harvest one was like everything, but the 2 production type ones were split into 2 different set effects, which I just found really strange. Unchained Talent. So this was actually a very good relic. I'm going to put it in B tier purely because it was something you could quickly equip to give yourself a skill boost, and it got you over a lot of hurdles that you would often find yourself having to face getting an extra, I don't know, 10 levels in a skill. You'd only have to get 2 levels in a skill because this boosted all of your non-combat skills, I believe, by 8. Now we have Drakan's Touch. It was like a cheap knockoff version of Soul Stealer. It gave you a 50% chance to heal for 10% of your damage dealt. C tier. Endless Knowledge. This just gave you a book that allowed you to spellbook swap. It's nice that it was given to everyone here, so for that reason, it's going to go C tier as well. I think it's kind of middle of the ground. Fast Metabolism. This increased your hit point regeneration by 4 times. F tier. I think this is an F tier. The only reason it's not a never again is because in Deadman mode, they've had a couple of sigils that when paired give a similar effect to this, just way stronger. This only being 4 times really just made it the most underwhelming set effect you could have. How are we looking? Leagues 1 to 3, how are we looking? C tier is a little heavy. B tier looks quite good, actually. I'm happy with B tier. Like, would I move the Leagues 1 relics down a tier if I could? Yes. If they had to stack up against other relics with multiple region choices, they would all probably come down a tier, except for the unlimited run regeneration. That's locked in at A tier. All right. Leagues 4, Endless Harvest, Production Prodigy, and Trickster. Leagues 4 was the best job that Jagex have done at balancing earlier relic choices. Like, looking at tier 1, there really isn't a bad choice. If I had to rank them, in my opinion, I would put Trickster at the top, Production Prodigy, and then Endless Harvest. So I'm gonna go ahead and put Trickster in A tier. I think it was really innovative. So for anyone who didn't know, Trickster allowed you to burn up to 9 logs at a time, provided there was space on the floor to do so. It allowed you to never fail pickpocketing and AFK pickpocket, because it would just keep going until you maxed out your coin pouches. It also increased the amount of coin pouches you could get up to before it stopped you pickpocketing. The pickpocketed loot was doubled, which also stacked with the rogue's outfit. And just in case that wasn't enough, it also gave you the Sage's Greaves, which were some boots that gave you passive agility XP as you ran around the game. And this was incredible because I still remember people just running around the tree in the Lumbridge Castle courtyard, just endlessly running, doing laps, getting agility XP. It was so funny to see. And I still think this was the best tier 1 relic just because of how fresh it felt as a relic. The other 2 I'm gonna put in B tier because they were still good. Tier 2, this is why I put the original Fairies Flight in F tier, because the Leagues 4 Fairies Flight was so much better. You could still go to any Fairy Ring and Spirit Tree, but you could also go to a Tool Leprechaun, which just gave you quicker access to so many newer places that actually were super beneficial. So B tier, I think for the Globetrotter, it was still good. It did fall off quite heavily, but it was still good. So I think C tier for that. Tier 3, this is the tier that will divide people. Bankers, no, versus Fire Sale. Fire Sale made it so that all shops were free and you could buy any item you wanted from a shop, automatically noted. The caveat being that shops would no longer buy your items for gold, so you couldn't just buy an item from them for free and sell it back. But that was quickly alleviated by alching your own items for money. So this was just an infinite money glitch. It really sped the game up for people who did pick it because you would never have a money problem early on. So where does it belong? I'm gonna put it in F tier. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, he's a dirty Banker's Note stan. Here's my rationale, okay? Fire Sale, sure, it gave you unlimited money. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but I feel like that early game Iron Man mode struggle is part of what makes it a unique game mode. You have to come up with fun ways to get around the problems you face. Fire Sale removed that. And I know it's a limited time game mode and you're meant to have fun. Previous leagues have proven that you don't need Fire Sale to have fun, and my other rationale for putting this in F tier is it fell off a cliff. You know, late game, you really didn't have a need for money anyway. I did pick Fire Sale on one of my accounts and I really felt like it lost its value pretty quickly. Like seeing people run around in Obsidian gear on day 1, you would just be like, nice, Fire Sale, okay. Bankers Note, A tier. Okay, I know there's a big disparity between the two. You could argue that Banker's Note was more for people who weren't as confident in PVM situations because you could take an unlimited amount of food into a raid, never have to worry about dying. I just sat and thought about it for a minute. B tier. I think they're both great, Fire Sale and Banker's Note, but I think Banker's Note again just stayed relevant for longer. It also had a lot of use early game, so if you didn't pick Endless Harvest, right, you could endlessly fish with Banker's Note all of a sudden. And that applied to a lot of other skilling situations, farm runs, mining, you know, smithing, everything. You wouldn't have to bank as much, obviously. I think a lot of people are going to disagree with Banker's Note being B and Fire Sale being F, but that's my choice. That is my choice. Combat Relics. These were all really well balanced for Leagues 4, I think. You know what? I'm going to put all of the Combat Relics into B tier because I do feel like they were all really well balanced. Magic was obviously stronger, but I think that's got a lot less to do with the relic than it has to do with the gear available to you in Leagues 4. For tier 5, we have the Slayer Relic Bloodthirsty. I didn't rate this one. It allowed you to receive and cancel a Slayer task through your Slayer helmet, which I really didn't think was that good a quality of life change. It gave you a higher chance to proc your Expeditious or Slaughter bracelets, so extending or speeding up a Slayer task, sure. And it did boost the superior spawn rate, as well as having a chance to spawn a bloodthirsty Slayer creature, which was just like a bigger, superior variant. But I think it was lacking the choice to pick your own Slayer task. A lot of people had that problem with it, and I think it just fell short of the mark. I would actually put this one in F tier as well. Infernal Gathering, pretty much the same as the Infernal tools from Trailblazer 2, so I'm just going to put that straight into C tier. I don't think it was anything groundbreaking. It's just a whatever relic, honestly. Treasure Seeker was fantastic, as usual, opening, caskets, all of that kind of stuff. But it also allowed you to almost duplicate your reward casket. When you opened a reward casket, there was a small chance that it would give you another one, and an even smaller chance that it would give you another one of a higher tier. You could open like an elite clue casket and potentially get a master clue casket for free. I played around with something similar in Deadman mode. I think it was called Sigil of the Bloodhound, and it was honestly insane. This one is B tier for sure. I'm putting this one in B tier. I think it was great. Tier 6, we've got Equilibrium again, which was the same as it was before. It gave you extra XP on any action that gave you XP. It was still 10%, but it also gave you a little bit of extra XP for your lowest skill. I still don't think it was really enough. And for me, it's F tier. I just would never pick something like that, especially when the XP rates were so crazy already. Farmer's Fortune, I made a video about being a bit disappointed and baited into picking this. And I think I should explain that, because I didn't feel baited into picking Farmer's Fortune because there was a better choice, but I felt baited into picking it because there was a lack of decent choices in this tier. I will put it in C tier though, because I do think it was a good relic. It had a chance to save your seed on planting. It gave you extra resources when farming. It sped up your farming cycles by 25 times. Your farming patches could never die or get diseased, so that was good as well. But it was really the best of a bad bunch in my opinion, because the last one is Ruinous Powers. This gave you access to the Ruinous Prayer Book, which had some really strong offensive prayers. And I think this one is also C tier, because I definitely think that for PVM, Ruinous Powers was pretty insane. It had some really strong things in the prayer book. But this tier did feel really weird, because you've got a combat relic like Ruinous Powers. You've got a production type relic like the farming one, and then you've got an XP or skilling relic like Equilibrium, and it didn't really feel like it was a massively hard choice between the three. It just felt like a weird choice between three totally different styles of playing. Tier 7, in my opinion, the best tier of Leagues 4. Berserker gave you more damage the lower HP you were, and you were also guaranteed a max hit on your first hit against an NPC. I think this is an A tier relic. Honestly, Berserker was so good. And I had a lot of regret not picking Berserker on my first run through with Mage. I'm honestly going to put Soul Stealer in A tier as well though, because I don't think it was a bad option. It increased your minimum hit by 10%. And I think that baited a lot of players because they thought that they would never hit zeros. It was also like the Drakan's Touch from Shattered Relics, so you would have a 50% chance to heal and restore your prayer by 10% of your damage dealt. So it was a really good relic for PVM, for people who maybe didn't have Banker's Note that wanted to sustain in raids, or for people that just weren't as confident doing more difficult content. It was a really good relic. Weapon Master is also going straight into A tier. I genuinely don't think there's a bad choice in this relic tier. Weapon Master was incredible fun. I did it with a melee build. Your special attack would restore a lot quicker. Your special attacks would always hit. You'd be guaranteed a hit, which was great for defense lowering special attacks, or for just straight up damage. You would restore special attack quicker, and you could also sacrifice some of your HP to do a special attack when you ran out of special attack energy. That was really good, but there were definitely a few times where I think I got myself killed trying to carry on chaining special attacks, so it had some risk attached to it. And for the last tier, we have Executioner. This gave you an axe that you could throw, and it would execute any enemy at 20% of their health. And this was absolutely crazy for raids, because you would get to potentially the more difficult enraged phases of like Tombs of Amaska or Chambers of Xeric, and you would just not only execute the boss, you would get a shit ton of points for doing so. And if you had this, you would more often than not claw out more points than other people who didn't have this. So almost discouraging people from wanting to raid with you when you had it. So I'm going to put it in B tier. It would be higher. It would 100% be an A tier relic if it didn't come down to the fact that it trivialized the game again a bit too much. Guardian was a really, really cool relic. And I'm actually going to put this one into A tier. Guardian was a great relic. It allowed you to summon like a companion, an NPC that would attack things that you were attacking, and it would always use the style that NPC was weak to. That was crazy. It could also do AoE attacks. It would just make up for whichever combat style you were mostly lacking in, and for that reason, I think it's insane for doing a lot of solo raids content. Undying Retribution. This one was annoying. In Soul Wars anyway, you would find people running up to you and just suiciding, because when you died with Undying Retribution, you would come back to life and you would explode in a massive area of effect attack. It would deal a ton of damage to anything nearby, NPCs, players in Soul Wars. Yeah, it was kind of crazy. It also didn't count towards any death penalties in raids, so you wouldn't lose points for triggering this, and there was definitely a couple clutch situations where I saw people using this. It did have a 3-minute cooldown, which is pretty long. Not many fights went on long enough for you to be able to trigger this more than once. So I feel like its case uses were a lot less because you would literally have to die to use it. It was great with Weapon Master because you would be able to spam your special attacks, get really low HP, and then if you died, you died. And it was also great with Berserker for that reason. So I'm going to put it in A tier. And that, ladies and gents, is our tier list. At first, I didn't think that this needed a D tier. Now I feel like it needs a D tier. I think it would be unfair to keep the League's 1 C tier relics there. I know that they kind of, they paved the way. We had the Konar's Blessing up in B tier. This is the one that gave 10% damage and then 30% damage on Slayer Task. I don't think it's groundbreaking, so it can stay in C tier instead of B tier. Was I too harsh on Fire Sale? I'll admit it, I was way too harsh on Fire Sale. It's a great relic, okay? Honestly, Banker's Note is A tier. I just know people are going to be so mad at that. Banker's Note allowed you to do so much. I think it's above so many other relics. I was probably too harsh on this Slayer relic because the Bloodthirsty stuff was cool. It just sucked that you couldn't pick a Slayer task. Now, I don't want to undermine how good S tier is, because S tier is like the best of the best. Things that have innovated Leagues to another level. And for that reason, I think Trickster, S tier. And I was a Production Prodigy stan for the longest time. Second account I made on Leagues 4 took Trickster, would never look back. If it's an option for Leagues 5, I would pick it again. And I think that is where things are going to stay. I like that. Now, what relics are going to come back in some format in Leagues 5? We know that some relics definitely are coming back. Jagex have confirmed that. They may not come back in the same format as we've probably shown through this tier list. Relics of old have kind of developed or changed to become passives over time. I think it's safe to say Last Recall is definitely coming back, but I think it will stay as a passive. I think Trickster will come back. I wouldn't be surprised if they slightly nerfed the Sage's Greaves. I wouldn't be surprised because it was kind of crazy, and we'll just work our way down here. I think that the Clue relic will come back, but I do think that the choice within the tier that Clue Scrolls is in needs to change, because I don't think it should ever be a choice between Slayer Relic, Clue Scrolls, or Skilling. I feel like that just divides people so bad to the point where you can have some really big relic regret. Weapon Master or some sort of special attacking relic will 100% come back. I feel like it's such a easy piece of gameplay to capitalize on that people enjoy, so I really hope it comes back. I'm sure it will. Considering Berserker was kind of in Leagues 3 as Knife's Edge and Leagues 4, I think that it was a popular enough relic that it will return in some format in Leagues 5. Soul Stealer and the elements that are behind the Soul Stealer relic do go back to Leagues 2, so again, I think that will come back. I think Guardian was a great relic. I wouldn't have put it in A tier if I didn't think so, but I'm not sure that it will come back. And the same for Undying Retribution. I'm not sure Undying Retribution will come back because both of these were a bit of an experiment with something totally new. I think they were both popular, don't get me wrong, but I wonder whether these will be just experimental relic slots and we'll see something totally new in their stead. Banker's Note has got to come back. I mean, I think both Fire Sale and Banker's Note will come back in some format because they were that popular. They sparked loads of discussion. There was a huge divide between Banker's Note and Fire Sale takers. And I think it was great that it was an early relic choice. Okay, so Endless Harvest, Production Prodigy, they will always come back, I think. Two starter relics that I think are just very easy choices. I'm not going to get into the combat relics because not only do we not know whether they'll be making a return, but we know that combat masteries are replacing a lot of combat relics. Fairy's Fly. I think Fairy's Flight will come back because Fairy's Flight is pretty unique gameplay angle for getting around the map. I think that will come back, and I think the same will go for Eternal Jeweler or Globetrotter or whatever it's called, the jewelry variant of that. I think they will always generally come back. Executioner Relic. Now this was, like I say, really broken, and I actually don't think it will come back. Infernal Tools. Now, I'm pretty sure that will also be in this league because there are people, believe it or not, that like to do nothing but skill during leagues. And that is totally fine because I get it. Skilling can be super enjoyable. So I can totally see how people who might pick Endless Harvest would also pick Infernal Tools. I think Infernal Tools are a safe choice for Jagex to probably put into Leagues 5 again. Ruinous Powers. I don't think Ruinous Powers will come back. But I would be super excited to see if this is an opportunity for Jagex to try out the God Alignment prayers. The God Alignment prayers were a bunch of kind of little prayer add-ons that they pitched some time ago for the Wild Gothic Sleeps quest. Unfortunately, the first reveal of these received quite a lot of criticism. I may have been guilty for adding to that, but they were very complicated, and I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see Jagex try them out in leagues like they did with Ruinous Powers. For the Slayer Relic, I'm just going to say it straight up, it will come back, I'm sure. But if they do not have it that you can pick your own task, it's going to stay in D tier. And I'm not going to go through the never again tier because, like I say, they'll never come back. Absolute Unit, maybe. And if Absolute Unit did come back, I would be putting it in A tier, for sure. That is the tier list, ladies and gents. That is it, completed. What I will do is I will put a copy to the public tier list in the description so that you can make your own tier list from all of the League's relics if you wanted to. Leagues 5 is not that far away now with an end of November release. I'm super excited for it. I know a lot of you guys are really excited for it. So again, if you want to join in on some of the discussion, I'll put a link to the official Leagues Discord in my description, as well as my own Discord if you want to come, just have a chat or join in with some of the clan stuff we do in game. And that's it for today. So I will see you all in the next one.